What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another Angle of Pursuit podcast, your fantasy football, sports betting, and NASCAR home over at fakepigskin.com. I am your host, Kyle Robert. You follow me on Twitter at NotoriousKRO. With me, as always, is Brian Twining. And Brian, we're actually going to talk some fantasy football today. I know it's something that has seemingly disappeared from this show from the past couple weeks, but NASCAR has garnered some of our attention as of late, and with football kind of in a dead period, as much as we love it, and as much as we're prepping for the upcoming season, we've been kind of shifting our focus a little bit. But today we're getting back to our bread and butter, and we're talking some fantasy football.
Yeah, it's really exciting to kind of start to dive a little bit deeper into these teams for the upcoming season. The last time we were talking, it was more so like post-draft, like just kind of what we think is going to happen. And now we're starting to see rumblings coming out from coaching staffs and beat reporters. So we're starting to get into the meat of preseason fantasy information.
Yeah. And despite everything kind of being shut down and there not being a lot of practices and people reporting to team team facilities and that kind of stuff, there is still some interesting stuff coming out. But before we dive into any of that, we're going to talk some Dalvin Cook, we're going to talk some Tampa Bay Bucks, we're going to talk some Chris Godwin, see how we feel about the shift they may be making. But Fake Pigskin lost Dave Cherney, Road Warrior D on Twitter. It's been really cool to see a lot of people kind of post messages about him. Unfortunately, he did pass away. And Jared over at, on the main Fake Pigskin account did put something out. And, we don't really know a lot right now. We don't know. Our goal is to do some sort of show for him. We're going to try and do something in his honor. But I just wanted to mention that happened in case you missed it. And, he was on our draft show. Dave was incredible. He was super encouraging, always promoting other people's work, and always being super helpful whenever he could. So it was definitely a big blow to the dynasty community, to Fake Pigskin, and the fantasy football world as a whole. So just want to say we're going to miss you, Dave, and we're going to do what Dave would want us to do, is move forward, move on, and talk some fantasy. And we're going to go to Minnesota because Dalvin Cook is holding out. He wants a contract. Alexander Mattison is still there, and the dynasty community is going wild. People think Dalvin Cook, Alexander Madison's now fifth round. I saw he went in the fifth round of a startup dynasty draft, which is
That's insane.
I get Alexander Mattison is awesome. I'm a huge fan. And I get that running back windows close a lot faster than anybody wants to admit. But once again, the fantasy community is overreacting and taking something that, if we were talking about this in July or August even, I would be like, oh, okay. I have a lot more pessimism. But here in early June, when we're talking about, team facilities aren't even open. We're not sure what the off-season programs are going to look like, when training camp may or happen, or even if it does. But Brian, I guess for you, when you see the Dalvin Cook news, when you see the way people are reacting to the news as if it's earth-shattering, where's your head at?
Man, if I'm an Alexander Mattison owner right now, and especially in Dynasty, I am trying to flip him to any and all takers because, like you just said, a fifth-round draft price in a Dynasty startup, that to me is asinine for a guy who, he's not going to see the field more than, a third of the time with Dalvin Cook there. And like you said, we're in the middle of June. Dalvin Cook came out and said he's going to hold out until he gets a contract, but they haven't even reported for, voluntary minicamp. And that's all going to be Zoom meetings anyways. And, he kind of probably knows that he's not going to get the kind of stuff that Ezekiel Elliott got. He's not in that tier quite yet, just an on-field performance. So I don't think we're going to be looking at a prolonged holdout all the way up into the regular season for him. So people jumping at the gun to draft Mattison that early, I think, are crazy. And like I said, if I have Mattison, I'm looking to flip him right now for as much
Yep.
as possible.
Yep. If people are really willing to pay that kind of price, I'm 100% on board with that. Looking at his numbers, like he had 4 games where he carried the ball double-digit times, and in that game he averaged 2.5 yards a carry. Like there's a lot to be excited about Mattison. I think he's going to be a guy that like I was trying to acquire last year because I think he has the potential to take over the lead back role. But I do like Dalvin Cook has no room to stand on. Like this is a team that can move on to Mattison if he's like, yeah, I want this and that, and nobody, you don't want to pay me, that's fine. And maybe that happens. Maybe the Vikings go, we move Diggs, we'll happily move Dalvin, and we'll keep acquiring pieces and rebuild the team. And if that happens, then sure, we'll have eggs on our face. But at this point, I just don't see that happening. Like I don't see a team, like Ezekiel Elliott's situation in Dallas, I think was very different. I think he was really important to what they do. I think Jerry Jones is a lot more inclined to paying guys like Ezekiel Elliott big money, where there's a lot of teams in the NFL just aren't going to pay their running backs that much. They're realizing these guys have shorter shelf lives and they can churn through them. And there's a reason why the teams like the Niners would rather have 3 or 4 or 5 of these guys on their roster than have one guy who makes that much money, even when they're as talented as Dalvin Cook.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a situation that's unlike anything that we've seen in Dallas or even Tennessee looking to kind of, lock up Derrick Henry. I mean, for what Tennessee does, Derrick Henry is very vital to their offensive game plan. Not saying that Dalvin Cook isn't important to what Minnesota likes to do, but we saw Alexander Mattison step in at times and look, not quite the player that Cook is, but he fulfills the role perfectly fine. So Cook is kind of, stepping in quicksand here if he thinks that he's going to get, huge money. And I think he'll come to the realization the closer we get to the season that he's got to get on the field if he wants to sign for a big deal.
Yeah, well, and also Dalvin hasn't played 16 games in his career. He's been in the league 3 years. He's dealt with injuries, played 4 games as his rookie season. He played 11 games his sophomore season and only played 14 last year. So, I mean, if it's, like I said, if it's late July, if it's early August, and he's still holding out hope that he's going to get paid, then maybe we'll look foolish. But at this point, I just don't see that. But let's move on. Let's talk some other stuff because there's an interesting trend that seems to be developing this offseason. I think it's going to make things really interesting for fantasy. And that's NFL teams using more 12 personnel. We have 4 teams we're going to talk about today. And we're going to start with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Brian. Obviously garnering a lot of attention with Tom Brady there and Rob Gronkowski there. And people still holding out hope that OJ Howard can be a thing. And you got Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, and there's so much fantasy relevance. I guess let's start with the tight end position. Is OJ Howard still have potential? And in a world where they're using 2 tight ends, when you have Gronkowski as the other option, like, is there going to be reliability are you going to be able to trust OJ Howard on a week-to-week basis, or is he more of a guy for dynasty that, but I mean, even at that point, like, how long has he been in the league? I don't know. Where's your head at with the tight ends and OJ Howard specifically?
I've long been an OJ Howard apology person, so I'm going to stick with him. I do think that Tampa is one of those teams, though, that I think the reasoning why they're going to this kind of offensive set is more so to protect Tom Brady and less to kind of utilize the athleticism that they have at the tight end position. I think we're going to see a lot more like max protect with Brady in the backfield and, with either Gronk or OJ Howard going out on routes. I think we see a lot more Cameron Brate than we're expecting, probably because he is a better blocker than Howard is. Yeah. So, I think Howard is kind of a wait and see kind of guy. I don't really see the Gronk coming in and making as big of an impact as what people are saying. I think he has the possibility of finishing top 12 just with his, his skill set down in the red zone and in the end zone. But I really don't think we're going to see the tight ends used in Tampa the same way that we saw Brady use them in New England.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I think Gronk's a really good blocker, so that makes a lot of sense. I guess the biggest impact of Bruce Arians coming out and basically saying that this is going to be like their main offense, they're going to use, obviously run different formations, is the evolution of Chris Godwin. And, there was a lot of optimism, and we talked with Michael Florio about why, or maybe it was Small, I'm trying to remember, about why Godwin is getting so much more buzz and so much more hype. And, there was a lot of talk of, well, he plays in the slot, and there's, Tom Brady slot receivers have had so much more success. And, Godwin was a guy that played 24% in the slot in 2018, played over 50% in 2019. And that was a big part of his breakout last year. So obviously with 12 personnel, we're going to see more Chris Godwin on the outside. Now, I'm not saying Chris Godwin is terrible. I'm not saying he can't succeed, because I think he's a phenomenal football player who has the skills to really perform at that. And as a matter of fact, we'll have Matt Harmon on the show in a couple weeks. So I want to particularly ask him about, kind of that potential. But Brian, I guess for you, maybe we make Mike Evans and Chris Godwin a little more even with the evolution of the offense, or do you still think there's enough slot work and other stuff that Chris Godwin is still a guy that you want over Mike Evans?
It's man, this is a really tough situation in Tampa when you're looking at it from a fantasy perspective, just because, you would expect a guy like Godwin to come in and be the Julian Edelman style player for Tom Brady. But with them transitioning into this kind of offense, I think the upper hand goes to Mike Evans and him being that tall wide receiver on the outside that Brady can just kind of, throw it up to him. I mean, and like you said, that's no knock on Chris Godwin's ability to get open, create space. But I just think that Mike Evans is being discounted too much, with people kind of, expecting Tom Brady to take another step back in arm strength and his inability to get the ball down the field as much. And last year's him being like in the bottom 5 in the NFL in yards per attempt. I don't know. I'm a lot higher on Mike Evans than I think other people are. And I think he could have a very similar season as he did last year.
Yeah, when I have two receivers this close, and in terms of like where I'm at mentally with both of them, and there's a round or 2 round difference on price tag, like I'm gonna go with the cheaper option every time, and 9 times out of 10, it's either going to be pretty even or I'm actually going to come out ahead. So I'm happy to take Evans on the discount and kind of see where the chips lay. But yeah, I'm 100% with you. We're going to talk 3 more teams, but Brian, before I dive into that, what is your thought kind of in general with teams making the shift? Like in terms of fantasy tight ends, in terms of guys who may be drafting, like, is there going to be potentially more streaming options? Is the position going to be more frustrating? Yes to both. Like, what do you think?
It's one of those things. The tight end position has long been like the worst position in fantasy football because it was so difficult to find guys that could produce week in and week out. And I've kind of equated it to catcher in fantasy baseball, where unless you have those top 2, top 3 guys, you're better off just continuously streaming guys and trying to pick matchups. But I think it's going to make it even more difficult now that teams are kind of transitioning to more 2 tight ends. They're implementing, a kind of flow of tight ends. They're not using one guy, that it's going to be even harder to find value after those top tier dudes of Kelsey, Ertz, even Goddard now, Kittle. Like after those guys, like we're going to see, 20 tight ends that could potentially produce week in and week out.
Yeah, no, I think on a week-to-week basis, like unless you have Kittle or Kelsey, and like you mentioned, Ertz is probably still in the conversation.
Maybe Hayden Hurst.
See, I like him too, but like if Hayden Hurst's draft price goes up to where he's like a 5th or 6th rounder,
yeah,
I'm going to be out, and I'm just going to go to the next guy and be happy with it.
Yep.
Let's talk Seattle, because I think it's really interesting kind of what their potential is. Obviously, they brought in Greg Olsen this offseason. They have Will Dissly, a guy that, we talked about early in the year. It had a beautiful 3-game stretch where he had five for 50, 6 for 62, 7 for 57, 2 touchdowns, 1 touchdown, 1 touchdown. 8 targets, 7 targets, 5 targets. Had a nice run. Got even like the next game had four targets, 81 yards. Then got injured against Cleveland and basically went away for the rest of the year. We saw Jacob Hollister have an impact. They have Greg Olsen. They seemingly have 3 guys that they can run some really versatile stuff. Like Hollister can line up as a fullback. They can do some blocking. While this may be good for Seattle as a football team, I think trying to own any of these guys in fantasy is going to be a head scratcher.
Yeah, no, I want no part of that tight end room. This is turning into DK and Lockett on the outside and the running game for Seattle. Russell Wilson is going to look to push the ball down the field off of the running game, and we're going to see a spattering of tight end, whether it be Olsen, whether it be Hollister, whether it be Disley. I don't think we're going to have a consistent producer from that position that is going to make me want to take any of them. Now, if you're in a tight end premium league, and you're looking to kind of stockpile 2 or 3 other guys after your starter, I mean, I think Disley is a great option because Greg Olsen, he's older. He's not fleet of foot anymore. He's had a few injuries over these last few years. So, because if he goes down again and Disley's healthy, like you said, we saw him produce pretty close to tight end 1 numbers. So
yeah,
I think he's a good hold guy.
I think Disley's somebody that I would potentially draft as my tight end and kind of see how it goes and be ready to drop him as soon as I needed to, whether that's after the first couple of weeks if I realize that he's not going to be as involved as much as I thought. Or it's going to be more of a okay, now your turn, rotation. I do think in terms of fantasy potential and upside, he has the most potential. I think Greg Olsen, like Gronkowski, could be a huge touchdown guy or do almost nothing. And I think Hollister is a super versatile weapon that could be deployed a bunch of ways, but I don't think is necessarily viable for fantasy leagues. Let's stay in the division and let's talk about the LA Rams because I think they are going to be, in terms of tight ends, one of the most interesting teams. Tyler Higbee, speaking of runs, had an amazing run to end the season. 7 catches, 12, 9, and 8 catches. 100 yards in 4 of the 5, 84 yards in the other game. Big play weapon, has a lot of potential. He signed a deal last year, 4 years, $29 million. Gerald Everett is the other tight end that we're going to be talking about. Is going to be in play. Sean McVay came out and said, Everett wasn't as productive as they'd hoped, but he thinks he needs to scheme better. Obviously, Brandon Cooks is gone. Obviously, Josh Reynolds, Van Jefferson could be interesting, but with Robert Woods, with Cooper Kupp, and the 2 tight ends, I think that's going to be a lot of what we see. I guess just do you think both of these guys are going to be viable, or are you just going one or the other, or where's your head at with this tight end crew?
Yeah, Gerald Everett and Tyler Higbee. I really like both of them. I love Everett's athletic ability on the outside, to him kind of take over those slot reps. Even with Cooper Kupp in there in the slot, I like them to run a lot of 2 wide set with Kupp, Robert Woods, and then Higbee and Gerald Everett on the field because they both create mismatches at the linebacker and safety position. And all of us are kind of excited about Van Jefferson. I think he can make a huge impact next year. I think he'll be probably one of those guys in Dynasty that I'm holding and I'm trying to acquire right now. But I think they're going to stick with those 2 tight ends. They're going to be running that a lot, and both of them could potentially wind up as top 12 options.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and I think it'll be interesting. They could run one of the tight ends as basically the outside receiver and let Kupp come more in the slot and that could be McVay. I'm sure he's been sitting in his office in quarantine just drawing shit up, getting ready for another season.
I think we see one of them line up as an H-back, a throwback to Chris Cooley in Washington.
Yeah,
He's
or
the last traditional.
or Delaney Walker when he was in San Francisco.
Yep.
They found unique ways to play him. So yeah, I think I'm definitely on board with that. Let's talk about the last team, and I'll let you just go because we were talking about this probably a couple months ago about the Green Bay Packers, about using tight ends, which we haven't seen them do. But it sounds like they're going to employ more 12 personnel, 2 tight ends, and the Jay Sternberger hype train is going down the track. People are getting excited about him. So talk to me about him and what we can reasonably expect, because he could be a guy that after the first month of the season, we're saying this might be a top 12-ish option the rest of the way.
Yeah, it's about damn time that the Packers, especially with them wanting to run the ball as much as they do now, that they're going to kind of go to that 2 tight end set. But they have a guy finally who can be a mismatch in that second level against linebackers and Jay Sternberger. I mean, he's a big dude. He's 6'4". There was a lot of hype with him coming out of college until he got injured. So he missed, pretty much the first half of the season before they even thought about activating him. Like you said, we haven't seen them produce a fantasy relevant tight end since Jermichael Finley. Aaron Rodgers seems to absolutely hate tight ends, but other than Devontae Adams, I mean, Alan Lazard was their second best receiver, and he was a no-name pretty much entering last year as well. So they need receiving options, and I think Jay Sternberger makes that big step as somebody that I'm going to be targeting as the last person to take a tight end, as long as his price doesn't continue to creep up with the kind of rumblings of them getting him more involved.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. Like, if you want to take him as your last option and be ready to pivot, I think that makes a ton of sense. I like Lazard more than most, I think, but think there's a good chance that this offense could be interesting. And I'm wondering, like, I think there will be a little more passing, a little less rushing. I think Mercedes Lewis is a good blocker and a big part of why they'll be using him. He'll be having him on the field a lot. But in terms of pass catching, I think Sternberger is the guy there. So yeah, I think he's definitely an interesting name and one I'll be kind of monitoring over the next month or two as we head to redraft season, because I think he could be a guy that take a shot on and be ready to pivot. Because like you said, if we don't get Kittle or Kelsey, wait until the end and take whoever's left. And if he's the guy for me, I'm happy to take shots and see what pans out. All right, Brian, this is good. Good to get back. Good to talk. Obviously, if you are interested in NASCAR, make sure you're checking out our show with our best bets every single race. If there's 2 in a week, we'll do 2 shows. We try and hit them. We try and do quick. Had a nice week last week with the Wednesday race. Had Martin Truex, had Ryan Blaney. They finished 1-2. So if you're interested in NASCAR, come check that out. We will try and do more sports betting content as stuff starts to open. And, PGA is back. NASCAR is going. The NBA is potentially returning. Hockey is around the corner.
And who the hell knows what baseball's doing?
Yeah, I mean, baseball's doing. So, but yeah, so we'll be here. We'll be talking. Like I said, we will have Matt Harmon from Yahoo joining us in 2 weeks. We'll actually do a live stream again. So not next Wednesday, but the one after that, I believe the 24th, 9 p.m. Eastern. We will be live on YouTube. So come hang out, come watch. I'll promote it a bunch between now and then. And but yeah, if you're not already doing so, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on our live streams. You don't miss out on our new content. Please thumbs up if you're still watching this video. It really does a lot to help us. If you have questions, if you have players you want us to talk about, if you have anything, leave comments. Follow us on Twitter at Greasy Rules 14, at Notorious KRO, at FPAOP for the show. Hit us up. Let us know we're going to be here all off season and hopefully help take you to a fantasy championship. But for Greasy Rules, for Brian Twining, I'm Kyle Robert, and we'll talk to you guys next time.
Peace.